Hello, scholars. Today we're going to be talking about the Black Death. We're actually going to begin a series of lessons on this. We will be talking about the Black Death, its spread, what it was, its overall impact on Europe in a political, religious, economic sense. This is really a major event in world history and is going to reshape European life. So we will be spending quite a few lessons here on the Black Death to really understand exactly the impact of this on the world. Now, to begin with, what was the Black Death? Well, the Black Death is the plague. The plague is a disease, or one of three different types of three different forms of the disease that's caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis is a pretty nasty little bacteria that is most commonly transmitted through fleas. So these little guys right here that we barely even notice were quite deadly during the Middle Ages. And most commonly, they would be carried into European communities by these nasty little guys, rats. So black rats carrying fleas, which are carrying Yersinia pestis, are going to bring the plague with them. Now, the plague comes in three forms. There is the bubonic plague, which attacks your lymph nodes. That's a part of your circulatory system, your lymphatic system to be specific, but I'm not going to get into the biology there. There is the septicemic plague, and there is the pneumonic plague, which attack the blood vessels and the lungs. Now, if you were to get one of these three forms of the plague, you would want to get the bubonic plague because your survival rate there is, depending on the medical care that is available, really about 20% to 40% chance of survival. That is, substantially more people died than survived once they got the bubonic. But the other two forms of the plague were near 100% mortality. That is, if you got it, you died. Period. So the bubonic, at least you had, a 1 in 5 to 2 in 5 chance of surviving that one. The real danger of the plague is it's not like what we're dealing with today with the Ebola outbreak. Ebola is not easily transmitted. You have to come in contact with the fluids of a infected person during a particular phase of their infection. Bubonic plague, well, that is transmitted through the air, through direct contact, simple handshake, or even somebody coughs on some food and that food is not cooked properly, and then you can get that plague. So it is very easy to transmit. A lot of people got the plague. Now, the plague does not first appear during the Middle Ages. The Black Death, which is a particular wave of the plague, is not the first time this has ever been seen. Plagues have been around for a while. The earliest historic reference to the plague was in Greece during the Peloponnesian Wars. It struck particularly the city of Athens really hard during this war. Athens lost a third of its population. That's not actually the earliest reference. Plague is referenced in the Bible, but it does not have a corroborating second historical source to back that one up. There are several sources, however, that reference this plague in Athens during the Peloponnesian War. Once again, plague strikes in Rome, 166 AD, the Antonine Plague. And this one is going to kill 7 to 10% of the population of the Roman Empire. It is a big deal. This is 3.5 to 5 million people wiped out by this plague. It was a substantial disaster to the Roman Empire. Some would even argue that this was kind of the beginning of the end. It would be a long end to the Roman Empire, and they would certainly have comebacks along the way. But a good argument could be made that the Roman Empire never really recovered from this 1066 plague, this Antonine Plague. Plague once again appears in 541. This is in the Byzantine Empire. It's called the Plague of Justinian. Justinian has You can't blame him for this. It just simply gets his name because he happened to be the emperor of the Byzantine Empire at the time of the plague. Justinian is actually considered to be one of the better emperors. Not that he doesn't have his fault, but I'm not teaching Justinian here. I'm teaching the plague. It was a very well documented plague. It was the first one that we have many, many, many sources that come back to us on exactly the impacts of this plague. It was believed to have begun in Asia, though with this one we're not exactly sure where, and it hit Europe particularly hard. During the worst months of the plague, Constantinople had as many as 10,000 people per day dying of this plague. Just imagine what that would be like. This is a city that was, at the time, near 1 million people. It was the most populous city on earth. But even so, 10,000 people per day dying, you have no place to put those bodies. You have no way to care for all of these people. It was a disaster of scales unimaginable. Beyond Constantinople, you also have tremendous catastrophic loss. It's estimated that Europe's population dropped by as much as 50% during the Plague of Justinian. Worldwide, this particular plague, which once again started in Asia, is estimated to have killed off about 100 million people. So the Plague of Justinian was a plague for the record books if we're not going to now move into the Black Death. The Black Death is a whole nother category. It refers specifically to this one instance of plague between 1346 and 1353. There will be reoccurrences of plague afterward, actually for about 500 years. Plague will pop up now and again, but the phrase of Black Death really does refer to this particular instance of plague. It most likely originated in East or Central Asia, believed to have appeared somewhere in the Chinese Empire or perhaps just outside, but then really, once it hit Chinese, that's where it's going to come out from. And this plague, just to blow Justinian out of the water, it's going to carry away about 200 million people. Now, that's the high estimate. There's a lower estimate of about 75 million. But in either case, this plague was more substantial than the Plague of Justinian. Now, it is first reported in China in 1331. So it's going to take 15 years for that plague to reach Constantinople. And from Constantinople, or from Haifa, really from both of them, it's going to make that leap into Europe. The plague is going to spread along a familiar trade route, the Silk Road. This would be the northern branch of the Silk Road. There was also a branch of it that went down through India as well. But this is the main trade route between China and the Middle East, and that is where the plague is going to spread. It's going to take a while to make it from China across the far less inhabited regions here. Wherever you have a lot of population, it spreads quickly. Where the population is more spread out, it's going to, encounter some difficulty with spreading. But by the time it gets to the Middle East, it starts to blossom again. We see 347, it hits Baghdad, it hits Constantinople later that same year. It starts to explode once it gets into the Islamic Empire. It first arrives in Europe in that date 347, and this is where we mark the beginning of the European Black Death. It first appears due to a Mongol invasion. The Mongols are spreading out. The Golden Horde is conquering everybody in sight, and they're besieging the city of Haifa. It's in the Crimean Peninsula, which is located right here. And during this siege, Mongol warriors are infected with the plague. They have carried that with them from China. There are Mongol warriors sitting outside of the city dying of plague, and they figure, hey, we could use this as a weapon. So they take warriors of theirs who had died and who are infected with plague. They attach them to their catapults, and they launch those plague-infested bodies into the city during the siege. We've got a whole bunch of people in tight conditions, no place to go, and all of a sudden disease starts to run rampant to the point where everybody wants to get out of the city. A group of Genoese merchants manages to make a run for it. They get on their ships, they break free of Haifa, they get out of there, and with them comes disease. Their ships have rats, the rats have fleas. Pretty soon, the merchants themselves have the disease, and they take that with them to Genoa and to Venice, and the disease is going to spread out from there. It hits Italy first. Well, really, it hits Sicily first, but then it's going to hit the major trading cities in Italy and spread out from there. Pretty soon, we've got all the major port cities, Marseille, and then later Barcelona, and it just runs rampant through the trade routes. Hardest hit areas were definitely the cities. Anytime you've got a large population in a small area, disease is going to spread. It's going to spread quickly. It's going to spread easily. Disease in these cities, basically all major European cities, see death rates between 40 and 60% during the Black Death. Once the cities are hit hard, any nobility that happens to be in the cities, they want to get out of there. So they and their servants get out of there. They head out to their country manors and, of course, bring plague with them. So pretty soon, all the serfs on all those manors are getting sick and dying as well. And you wind up seeing death rates on the manors also in that range of 40 to 60%. So the manors were not spared. It was not good to be a serf. Mortality rates among the serfs were very high. It was really an indiscriminate killer. We do see some patterns here. Cities and manors along trade routes were hit a little bit harder than other places. There are particular areas that did not participate in trade, were not along major trade routes, and were largely spared. What is modern Poland, around the city of Warsaw, didn't see plague because they weren't on any major trade routes. It just kind of skipped them. There are a few other spots as well. But for the most part, Europe was hit really hard. All told, about 50% of the population of Europe, 45 to 50% of the population of Europe was wiped out during the 6 years or so that the plague was running rampant throughout Europe. So really bad times, not nice to be a European. And we are just getting started on the plague, because this elimination of population is going to have a huge impact on what's going on. So more on that next time. I'll see you in class.